Welcome to my sewing room. We have so many beautiful things for you today, and I have as my very special guest, Jewel Hulitt. She is educational consultant for the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Look at this beautiful quilt. Absolutely a gorgeous quilt. It has the little squares which have been feather stitched on, a beautiful alphabet, and machine embroidered, and every one of these squares is something represent. For instance, B is for bear, C is for candle, P is for pansy, V is for vest with little buttons and little raised things. One of the most darling quilts I've ever seen. This is one of the elegant things we can do with heirloom embroidery is making wonderful linens. This tablecloth, you know what, maybe I'll just open it up a little bit for you and then you can see it a little bit better. This is an elegant tablecloth with the organza and the embroidery on the outside, the machine embroidery on the linen on the inside. And you know, my mother and my mother-in-law used to call these bridge cloths. And bridge cloths, if you play bridge, that's great, but if you don't play bridge, a lot of times we use a bridge table when we have company to set up extra tables. This is fascinating. Now watch what happens when I open it. First of all, the top, this damask box has a beautiful, real elegant, very Victorian looking embroidery on the top. But let me show you what's inside. This is a really special box. You open it up and it has a wedding shoe inside. So in other words, after your daughter or your granddaughter's wedding, you can take her shoe and fill it with flowers and then make a very special box and she can store it. Isn't that a wonderful idea? This is one of the most beautiful pieces I have ever seen. It is the sewing machine lace. The sewing machine lace and then more lace in the middle. Believe it or not, every bit of this was stitched on a sewing machine. This jacket is one of the most beautiful jackets. Now I bet you think the front of that jacket is really pretty, and so do I. But you haven't seen anything yet until I show you the back of this jacket. Can I just turn it around to show you? The wonderful, wonderful Victorian embroidery on the back with the pretty pinks and pale beiges and pale brown. Every bit of this embroidery was done on a beautiful piece of beige linen. I love chatelaines, and this chatelaine is a very Victorian one made out of linen and lined with machine embroidery and little pockets and photo transfers. Absolutely a great way to keep everything with you when you're sewing. The Footprints in the Sand is one of my very favorite of the little poems, and Jewel has taken this, completely digitized it with wonderful seashells and things of the sea and some sea oats and some let's see, Jonathan Livingston seagull. I have to remember that, and some seagulls. This is absolutely a beautiful wall hanging, and I think it would be especially nice if you happen to have a condo at the beach. We have some very special techniques for you today, and if you'll come along over to the technique boards, I'll begin to share them. I just love this woman's baseball nightshirt that Jewel has made. She has done a precious little Heavenly Dreams machine embroidery. And then this is what I really want you to look at, the sleeve. Now Jewel's favorite stitch is the feather stitch. And she has joined all of this together with the feather stitch after she did her really, really sweet machine embroidery. She's done little machine embroidery down the front panel, which has been attached with feather stitch. And look at this really beautiful pocket. That's what I'm going to share with you right now, how to make that beautiful pocket. First of all, you do your machine embroidery down the center strip and be sure it is finished. Then we have the beading with entredeaux on either side, and this has all been attached, by the way, with water-soluble stabilizer underneath. Then the next thing to attach with that wonderful feather stitch is simply 2 pieces of ribbon. Moving on down to the next row, we have lace on either side of the ribbon and then a finished piece of fabric on either side. Jewel has done a real interesting technique to finish the top of this pocket. She has put lace on the top, and that lace is simply going to be folded back, and that is the finish on the top of a pocket, and then she attached it to her beautiful nightshirt. I am so happy to have as my guest today my friend Jewel Hulitt of the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Jewel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha.
Now, what do you have to share with us today?
Well, I'm going to show you how to do heirloom strip piecing. And as you mentioned, the feather stitch is one of my favorite stitches. It's a stitch that we find on most machines, and it's kind of a lost stitch. We never, we kind of forget it's there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you simply how to create a pocket. And what I'm going to do is first I'm going to select my embroidered piece and make it in a band, because when we're joining our pieces we want it to be finished on both sides. And then I'm going to take my second step here and attach the beading on both sides of my centered embroidered piece with the feather stitch. And the next step will be attaching my beautiful ribbon on both sides of my beading, and then attaching my lace. And I'm going to show you how to simply take your centered embroidered piece and attach the beading next to my fabric, my centerpiece, by simply just taking, what I have my salve, and I put my centerpiece on top of the salve and then my beading, and place it about 1/8 of an inch apart.
Okay.
And then you just simply sew the two pieces together, joining each side with the feather stitch. And you have that beautiful feathery, it's very light
the feather stitch
and
is
lacy.
Feather stitch is one of the all-time favorite stitches for heirloom sewing, from handwork, of course, in the true Victorian era, and now this beautiful machine feather stitch.
Certainly is. It's a stitch that our grandmothers' mothers used to do by hand, and now we can create all this beautiful fabric piecing.
Now
with
show me
feather
about the
stitch.
ribbon. Stick that ribbon on there and let me see.
Okay, we'll just do it again.
Is it just as easy to do with ribbon as it is to do with the fabric pieces?
It certainly is. We're going to take our satin ribbon and we're going to place it next to the beading. Again, about
leaving a little bit. Okay.
About 1/8 of an inch apart.
You know, Jewel, I love the feather stitch as much as you do too. And people who are so fortunate as to have a machine that does a feather stitch, all of our hand embroiderers, or a lot of them, they go ahead and just do the feather stitch without any thread in it, and then they can go back and do perfect feather stitch by hand too, using their machine just to kind of poke the holes.
That's wonderful.
That is fascinating, the way that's catching that ribbon like that too.
And the ribbon, it's easy because the ribbon is stiff. It's a little bit stiffer, and so it just makes it
using just a regular,
easier.
60 or 70 needle?
Yes.
Okay, well, Jewel, that is absolutely fabulous. And now we have some lovely lingerie to share with you. Jewel has used the feather stitch in some other fascinating places on this darling baseball nightshirt. She has used the feather stitch to attach the facing to the body of the garment. Let me pull this adorable sleeve over here. She's used the feather stitch to attach this wonderful embroidered piece to the bottom of the sleeves. And I have to turn it around to the back because there is the most adorable treatment she has done on the back. She's used the feather stitch to attach the top of the nightshirt to the body of the nightshirt. Look at her cute little embroidery and bow. And even there is a new technique on the bottom of this nightshirt. She has used the feather stitch to attach the lace to a finished hem. Absolutely creative. And now I'm going to go over here and ask Jewel once again to show you some more of her famous and fun tricks with the feather stitch. Jewel, go ahead.
Okay, well, what I'm going to show you is how I applied the lace, attached the lace onto the garment itself on the hem. And again, I'm taking my lace and my finished fabric piece, and I'm going to just, again, use my feather stitch.
Now this time, is it butted together?
Yes, we're going to butt it together, make it close, and simply stitch right down with the two pieces butted together.
And your finished edge and the feather stitch just attaches that lace?
That's correct.
All the way around there. And it really is pretty. Feather stitch has always been one of my favorites, whether it's done by hand or by machine. And I have a little secret to tell you. I've done it a whole lot more by machine than I have by hand.
Is that right? I agree. I have done the same thing. So, as you can see, the lace is bedded up to the finished edge of the fabric, and it's got that very delicate feathery look. Now, as Martha showed you on the sleeve, I am going to now join my embroidered band onto the sleeve. And again, using my feather stitch, my beautiful feather stitch, I'm going to place the embroidered band next to my finished edge fabric, and I'm going to, as I did with my strip piecing, I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch from my embroidered band to the edge of the fabric. And you want to do it slow, of course, because you want to make sure that you're joining both sides of the finished edge.
You know, I love the way, when it was in the pink, it almost looked like hand faggoting also, the feather stitch. At first I looked at it and I thought, now June, surely you haven't been doing handwork on this project, and sure enough, but it's really gorgeous.
That's right. Now, like I said before, if you do not, if you miss,
you can just go right back again.
Then we're just going to stop the machine, and then we'll just simply, as you can see, I missed a couple stitches, so what I'm going to do is just go over right on the top, and then you can just go over it again.
Just go right back over it again, and you know what? That's what we call holidays. We don't call it mistakes when we miss. We call it holidays or vacations. Jewel, thank you so much for being here today and for making that absolutely wonderful baseball nightshirt with all of your beautiful trims.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.
And now I have a quilt square to share with you. The quilt square for today has a really beautiful and very easy technique called shadow stitching. Let me share with you what that is. Do you see this beautiful design with the flowers and the leaves? We have 3 colors, blue, green, and yellow. Now the color comes from behind, just like shadow work embroidery. The stitching is straight, that goes all the way around the different segments, and then of course there's a pretty little quilting outline too, and an ecru thread. But there is yellow stitching around the yellow flowers, green stitching around the green leaves, and a beautiful blue stitching around the blue motif that holds the flowers. Shadow stitching is really very easy to do, and we're going to go through it step by step. First of all, you have to divide up your design in several different segments. For instance, the blue part of the design, I trace off on my iron-on transfer paper. This is the blue, and I've traced that on. Then these funny little things right here really are the leaves, so they are on a green paper. And then the flowers are on, the yellow fabric is glued to the paper. Now then, I'm going to cut out the flowers, cut out each one of the pieces, and then I simply peel it away, and then I have my sticky side, so I'm ready to press it down. Let me just show you what happens after we get all this done. Okay, I'm going to lift this up. That's my sandwich part. You see I have cut out the yellow side and pressed them down. I've cut out the green pieces, pressed them down, and now then all I have to do is take my wonder under here and pull it away from my blue piece, and then take my little puzzle here, put it down in the appropriate place, and press it down. Now, something I think is really easy to do, now that's not really on there exactly right, but what I think is really easy to do now, before I put my whole sandwich piece on, is to do the temporary spray adhesive, put my backing down. It makes it just so easy, and it holds it so nicely. Okay, now I'm going to sew from the side where, by the way, you do use the same color thread as you're sewing behind. I'm going to sew from the side where I can see the design that has been transferred. I'm doing a straight stitch. You can use anywhere from a 1.5 stitch length. Let's be sure, okay, I have my needle in needle down position. I just veer around. 1.5 or 2.0, I would probably not use any longer than 2.0. It just makes it easier to turn it exactly the right place. And then it's so easy, I'm simply going to straight stitch all the way around the design. Now when I change to another design piece, I will have to go ahead. For instance, this is the blue, so I'm stitching it in blue. When I go to the green leaves, I will stitch them in green, and when I go to the yellow flowers, I will stitch them in yellow. And next, I have some beautiful hand embroidery for you. I am so happy to have as my guest today my very dear friend Kathy Neal. Kathy is one of the most renowned embroidery teachers in the United States of America. Kathy has been designing for years for So Beautiful magazine and has taught at the Martha Pullen School of Art Fashion, and it is such a pleasure to have her here on the series to share with you some of her exquisite techniques which she has learned all over the world. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thanks again, Martha. It's always fun to be here. Today I'd like to share with you the padded satin stitch. This is a frightening stitch for some people, but I tell them that it's just a matter of taking your time and starting with a manageable project. A manageable project doesn't mean Aunt Charlotte's banquet size tablecloth. It means starting with something as small perhaps as one of these little coasters that you can purchase at any craft store and do just one tiny little motif. It's satisfying and it's doable. I'd also like to show you some of the more elegant applications of this padded satin stitch. I have several antiques here, Martha, because I know you love them.
Oh, I do. You and I both.
We could get in trouble, couldn't we, in antique shops. This first piece that I have is a dresser scarf that came from the Paris flea market and is an example of one of the original ways this stitch was used, and that is in white work embroidery. And white work just means white embroidery on white fabric, and you can see the lovely leaves on this motif here. You can see around this netting insert here, beautiful application of this stitch. And of course, one of the most beloved ways in all of stitchery to use this padded satin stitch is in the lovely, lovely monogramming of the late 19th and early 20th century. And you can see all manner of beautiful padded satin stitch on this piece. And finally, as I was telling you, it's always nice to do a manageable project, and this is what I use for my beginning classes at our school, Martha, is just a simple tea towel here that we've used the padded satin stitch just in the middle of the initial with some coordinate eyelets and some seed stitch dots. So let's get to stitching this. Remember that there are several steps when you're doing any padded satin stitch, and I have illustrated them here. You notice I'm not using a hoop. Now, let me tell you when I do use a hoop. I do use a hoop initially for my padding stitches, but when I do my final satin stitching, then I don't use a hoop. I usually do it over my finger. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it is incorrect if you use a hoop. In fact, when I studied in Paris, we did hoop up and we used a punch and a pull technique. First, we trace our design with a number 2 pencil on a heavily starched piece. And then we do our outline stitching. You notice I started here with a back stitch right in the middle of the motif. That'll all be covered up. So you can start your thread right in the middle. It'll just add to the padding actually. Finally, I've outlined a motif similar to the initial I showed you. And the first step of padding is to do horizontal padding. These stitches here, horizontal padding. And after I have that done, I go over here and notice that my padding is done within the perimeter of the stitch, the outline stitch. And finally, I do a second layer of vertical stitches, and you can see here that I'm ready now to do the satin stitching. I'm using some floche today because it's wonderful, and to start the stitch, I'll go straight up through the back of the padding to catch that, just like that, and then I put this over my finger and use my finger as a tiny embroidery hoop to do the satin stitches. And what I want to do is come up right next to my padding, just like so. And I want to make sure that the margins of my satin stitching are very neat and orderly. And I will mention to you that I have padded and I am satin stitching with my floche today, but you do not have to use the same thread. We don't talk a lot about thread, but our padding today is done in the same thread, and I'll show you over here when I get through doing some of this satin stitching. Notice how I'm keeping the margins nice and easy with this satin stitching. And I use my thumbnail. You'll notice how I use my thumbnail each time to help place that final padding stitch. Stroke this, and this floche has such a nice soft hand and a wonderful twist to it that
Kathy, is the floche cotton?
The floche is a cotton thread. Here you see I've done some of the satin stitching, and this is an example of where I use the floche to pad, and I went back with one strand of stranded cotton to do the satin stitching here. Either way is correct.
Either way is correct. Oh, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing these wonderful techniques for satin stitch. And now I'd like to invite you to come to my attic with me. I have a beautiful piece of ladies' lingerie to share with you. You know, we've been doing a lot of pretty things on the series, and I wanted you to look at the way this antique strap is. We have a piece of insertion in the middle, entredot on either side, and edging on either side. What a pretty way for a strap that's 100 years old or a brand new one. This is absolutely wonderful. The strips of batiste are connected to the insertion all the way down. There are some released pin tucks, or released folded tucks, not pin tucks, right here next to the waistline. Look at those wonderful lace miters, even a lace diamond. And at the bottom of the waistline is some wonderful beading that I feel sure originally some ribbon had been run through. And now I'm going to show you the skirt. I'm just going to hold it up because I think that's easier to see that way. Isn't that beautiful? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of insertion with tiny little strips of batiste and this beautiful lace edging on the bottom. What an absolutely beautiful way to finish a piece of lingerie that would also, this would make a beautiful christening dress too, the skirt exactly like it is. For our Sewing from the Heart today, I have a letter from my friend who is also designed for the magazine, Linda DeLallo. She writes, "Dear Martha, our church formed an affiliation with the Neighborhood Renewal Group in the fall of 1996. The group's name is Communities United to Rebuild Neighborhoods, and this name adequately describes its intent. There is an after-school group and a Girl Scout troop that wanted to have a fashion show as a highlight of their end-of-the-year activities. In all, about 35 children will be involved in the show. We've spent the last 2 months selecting simple patterns and ethnic-type prints for the designs. We have many ladies both in the church and in the neighborhood group that are sewing like crazy for the June 5th show. Laura Jenkins Thompson mentioned in one of her classes that one way to make a child feel special is by making a unique garment for him or her to wear. The neighborhood ladies say they can't buy these types of garments without spending a lot of money, so their only alternative is to sew them. I know these children will feel really special when we are done. For me, this is a real opportunity to share our Lord's love with others. Thank you for allowing me to share our story. Sincerely, Linda DeLallo." You know, it is so wonderful to sew and to use your sewing machine and your gifts and talents of sewing for those less fortunate. There is just nothing to describe the feeling of making something for someone that maybe doesn't even know that you've made it for them. I know we've talked about some children have never had a brand new dress or a brand new shirt, and I believe that some of you will reach out and make that dream come true. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today, and I would really like to issue a special invitation for you to come back next time.